Good morning. You guys awake? You can open the doors if you are. That'll wake you up. Hey, what a great morning singing praises to God. Paul, great job this morning. And, you know, as I'm back there just singing my heart out, and I apologize to those who are kind of in front of me back there, which is really everyone, right? Because I stand in the very back. But as I'm singing out, I couldn't help but think about how things line up with the message this morning. Many times Paul and I will talk about things and say, was this song go well with it? And many times I'll just say, hey, listen, it all goes well with it because we're all always talking about Jesus. We're always talking about God's love. But many times, unbeknownst to either one of us, things will just line up. And we're talking about God going before us, right? He is the Lion of Judah. He is the Lion and the Lamb. And how this we know, we will see the enemy run. It's just pretty awesome when we're talking about what we're talking about today. Being behind enemy lines. How's your 2018 going so far? Yeah? Woo! And you're celebrating, all right. We made it a week! Done it! It's almost 6 days, so. Tell me about it tomorrow, right? After the national championship. I don't know. But has God revealed anything to you that He's showing you to do this year? Like, well, I'm still trying to figure that out. You know, some people are like, well, I'm trying to figure out exactly what God's calling me to do. I'm not sure where He's calling me over here. I'm not sure what the next step is for some of you. God has shown Himself pretty big this week. And in some ways, as we get anxious about the next days ahead and what's God got in store, and He's speaking to us. You know, I hope you know this. Whether you hear Him or not, He's always speaking. We have to tune ourselves in to listen to Him. He's not going to compete with the other things around us. He's not going to, you know, like a child when they want your attention, they go, you know, Mom, Dad, hey. He's not going to do that. He's not going to scream over everything else that you're putting in front of Him. He wants you to turn down the dial to everything else that's going on, and you listen to Him, just like you would, as an analogy, if you wanted to sit down and have a conversation with someone that was important. If you and your spouse were on a date, if the president or whoever else showed up and you wanted to give your undivided attention to what they're doing, or maybe that you're doing right now. You're like, well, let me put my phone on silent and put it to the side and listen to what's going on this morning. Do you make intentional time to listen to God? Well, last week as we talked about these things on New Year's Eve that God has shown us, these 5 items, that I said if you would focus on those, I can promise you that your year would be prosperous. Now, I had to define that, because it's not always prosperous in the way that we define things as humans, but prosperous in God's eyes. So, as you look into this year, has He shown you anything yet that looks a little risky that He wants you to do? That looks overwhelming, or odds look like it might be stacked up against you if you were to do it? What if God told you that He wants you to go behind enemy lines for Him? Let's just say maybe He wants you to go to North Korea and go behind enemy lines. And you're like, I don't know, God, are you really telling me to do that? I'm not so sure about that. What about into Syria? What about another dangerous location? Would you do it? Well, on a completely separate note, as we look into this new year, I want you to think about if God called you to do something dangerous, but I also want you to think about this. Have you had a rough 2017? Are you ready to put that behind you? Maybe you've had a rough past. Maybe I shouldn't move. I get a little staticky, I guess, when I move. Maybe you've had a rough past. Have you ever wondered, can I get past my past? Today's message, I want to show you that you can. I want to show you that you don't have to stay stuck in whatever's happened in the past. You can move forward. So not only can God call you to some great things, and that might even look dangerous, might even look risky, but He also will call you out of your past to a future that He's called for you. And in today's message, we're going to talk about things from both of those angles that you might not even have saw coming. Can you get past your past? Are there things in your past that are what you would consider unforgivable? What if I told you none of that matters? You're like, wait a second, it all matters. None of it matters if you follow God. And what I mean by that is you don't have to focus on that any longer. You don't have to focus on that rearview mirror and make that so big. You can focus on what God's got going on in front of you if you will truly follow Him. Even if the odds are stacked up against you, you can prevail if you'll simply follow His plan and trust Him. Will you believe? Do you believe? Or you're like, that sounds like a good story. I'm not so sure about that. Well, let's dig in a little bit. So last week, as I shared the history of the Israelites, went back and said how they were in bondage and in slavery for over 400 years. And then God saved Moses and raised him up in Pharaoh's house as a prince of Egypt. And then after Moses killed an Egyptian for beating a Hebrew, he was exiled for 40 years. No longer in Pharaoh's house, but as a shepherd in the wilderness. Tending sheep, living a lowly life. And as he's doing that, we know the burning bush happened, and God spoke to him, and Moses argued with God. And then he was called to speak to Pharaoh and to lead his people out of Egypt to the promised land. We heard about the 10 plagues, or at least we talked and said there were 10 plagues. And the crossing of the Red Sea on dry land, and the manna that came from heaven, and the 10 commandments. And we talked about the rebellion of the people. And then we talked about how after 2 years of God preparing His people, He took them up to Kadesh and sent out 12 spies to spy out the promised land and to give a report back. And when they came back, we found out that 10 of them were fearful, but 2 of them were ready to move forward for God. 10 of them saw giants in the land. In fact, they all saw giants in the land. They all saw promised land that was flowing with milk and honey, that was ready to be taken, except for 10 of them focused on the giants while 2 focused on God. But because the 10 outweighed the 2 and they talked the people into rebelling, they spent another 38 years in the desert. Joshua and Caleb were the 2 that believed and tried to convince the rest that God would provide, and they would prevail. Because of their lack of faith, God punished them and made them wander in the desert and promised that none who rebelled would see the promised land. We fast forward now 38 years. They've wandered in the desert. Most of that generation has passed away. And God took Moses up on Mount Nebo and showed him the promised land and said, this is the land. You're not going to be able to enter into it, but I need you to appoint Joshua. And he appointed Joshua to lead. And last week we talked about Joshua chapter 1 and how 3 times God told him to be strong and courageous. And one of those times he said, be very courageous. And they told him 3 things of what not to do. And we laid out 5 promises that if we would just follow God, we would find prosperity in Him. So this week we're going to open in Joshua chapter 2, and we're going to continue in this series. We're going to see what happens next. God has just told Joshua exactly what to do. He's then went back and told his people exactly what to do. He stood strong, and he had a great leader mentality. The people had been with Joshua for 40 years, and they trusted him, and they said, listen, whatever you do, whatever you tell us to do, wherever you tell us to go, we will follow you. Only be strong and courageous, and if people don't follow you, they should die. It's a little bit different than last time we went. So here we are in Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies, not 12, but 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. It's really interesting. I like stopping sometimes and kind of digging in a little bit, because if you just read through it, it's like, at first glance, it's kind of like someone told you something like, did I really just hear that? Do we need to talk about this? I mean, is this in Scripture? Why would they do that? You're asking all these questions. Well, let's kind of talk about them a little bit. So, the first thing we see is Joshua sent 2 spies instead of 12. And he sent them secretly from the town of Shittim. So why do you think he sent them secretly? If right before this, what happened is he told the people what to do, and they said, hey, we'll do it. Well, the whole purpose of a spy is to be covert. And the less people that know, the better. The opportunity and the odds are that no one else will find out. I mean, if I asked you guys, hey, listen, I mean, I trust y'all, right? If I said, hey, listen, please don't tell anyone what I'm getting ready to tell you, the odds are stacked against me that it'll probably get out. Even though you have the best intentions not to tell. I mean, we all have, it's like, hey, listen, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but just you don't tell anyone else, right? Isn't that what we do? Well, so not only is that the case, think about the CIA operates here in America. Do you know about all their covert operations? Probably don't want to know about it. So if they were to tell everybody, there would be some disunity. Not only that, I think Joshua had a pretty good memory, because he was on the last spy mission 38 years previously. And he saw how that went down. So here, at least you send 2, you got a 50-50 chance instead of, right, 12, 2 out of 12% chance. Someone else do the math for me. So he was being a wise leader, even though God told him, listen, I'm going to give you this land and you can take it. Joshua still had to be a wise leader. He can't just say, okay, God told me to do this. Walk right into the land. Hey guys, how you doing? Can you give me the keys to this kingdom? I need this. He's going to encounter some resistance. So because he was a good leader, because he was wise, God knew who he was choosing, and he had battle experience before, and he had spy experience before, God knew he could trust him. And guess what? God gives you skills that he gives you. And because he calls you to do something, doesn't mean you just abandon what he's taught you before, what you've learned. You might use some of those skills that you've learned in life to go forward. And he had to be a wise leader, a wise military strategist, use his gifts and his confidence that God had given him to spy out the land first to see what they would encounter, and then how to proceed. Well, let's look at the maps and kind of see what's going on. Sometimes I like us to see, sometimes we talk about this land, but let's look at it a little bit better here. So here's kind of a globe laid out flat, and you see over here, this is Africa. And then if you go on the north end of Africa, the little pink area, that's Egypt. Okay? So they left Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea, and they ended up in a little tiny dot there called Israel. Let's go to the next map, and we're going to kind of start zooming in a little bit. We're kind of used to seeing things like this. Here we are, United States. Go east, you'll see the continent of Africa. Again, top right, you'll see Egypt. And then you'll see Jordan, Saudi Arabia. North of that, just northeast of that, you'll see Iraq and Syria. And just to the left of Syria is Israel. That's the promised land. Back then called Canaan. Let's go to the next map. Now we're zooming in a little bit more. Again, you'll see Egypt, and then you'll see Israel and Jordan. Now, at the very bottom there, where you see the 35-degree mark, or Elat, that little piece of water there is the Red Sea. Okay, so this is modern-day Israel and their land today. And you see where Bethlehem and Jerusalem is. Okay, this kind of gives us a little bit closer view of what we're going to talk about today. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now we have the Nile Delta the Red Sea coming up. This is a little bit skewed view, but Egypt and up there, this is kind of the route, or the supposed route of the Exodus, where they crossed the Red Sea, and then they went down to Mount Sinai. Now, maybe his GPS told him to go that way. It's not the direct route. Actually, God told him to go that way. So, even though it's not a direct route, God sent them down to Mount Sinai. And remember, for 2 years, he kept them back. And think about this. I think I mentioned this last week. They've been in slavery for 400 years. Do you think they were ready just to go into the promised land right away and take it with the mentality they had? Well, the truth is, it played out. They were not ready, were they? In fact, even after spending 2 years with God and Him providing for them and giving them passage across the Red Sea and victory against the Amalekites and manna from heaven and quail from heaven and the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai, they rebelled. In every place He provided, they rebelled. And then He said, now go take the promised land and spy it out. And they were afraid. They weren't ready. There was purpose in the waiting. Church, sometimes there's purpose in your waiting. If God hasn't given you something yet that you think that He's already promised to you, there's purpose in the waiting. Are you having proper preparation in your waiting, or are you cursing Him because you don't have what He's promised you yet? Maybe we have to look internally and see what He's trying to show us. So then if you go up there where it says the 12 spies, that's where Kadesh is, and that's where they went and stopped and camped out and sent the 12 spies up. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is a different view too. So Ramses up there in Egypt is where they left the Exodus from Egypt, and then they went down. You see Succoth, and then they went across the Red Sea into the wilderness, and then they went down here in the wilderness of Sin, and the Sinai wilderness, and Mount Sinai where the 10 Commandments were given to them. And then when God told them after 2 years to go up to Kadesh Barnea on number 12, which is interesting, number 12, the 12 spies, that's where they camped out, sent the 12 spies up, and then after that, when they rebelled, God sent them back. And you'll see how the arrow goes back down. Well, then, after 38 years, God took Moses up to Mount Nebo. You see where 15 and 16 is from the top of the map? That's where Mount Nebo is. You see where Jericho is, just to the left of that, across the Jordan River. So, are you kind of seeing where we're at? You picturing now the distances where things are. Let's go to the next map. All right. Again, this is kind of cool because it shows different pieces, right? Where the 12 spies were, the bitter water was changed into sweet water, quails and manna were given, 10 Commandments, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses, the bronze serpent incident, and then up there, Mount Nebo, the death of Moses. All right, next slide. All right, now we're kind of zooming in a little bit more. This is where Israel camped at Shittim. Just to the left of it, you'll see Gilgal and Jericho. Jericho is what we're going to be talking about today. Shittim is where they're at. Joshua's there. He's getting ready to send the 2 spies to go from Shittim to Jericho. All right? They're going to cross the Jordan River. The Salt Sea is called the Dead Sea now. And up there, see where the Sea of Chinnereth is? That's the Sea of Galilee. All right? Kind of knowing now biblically where we're at. Go to the next slide. This is the route the 2 spies took. Now, Shittim was located 15 miles east of Jericho, 10 miles east of the Jordan River. So if you notice, they only traveled 15 miles to spy out. They're camped out 15 miles away. But the Jericho River obviously is a good border spot. And they go 5 miles across the Jericho. So we're just in verse 1. We see a huge question arise. We've already answered the questions a little bit about why secretly, why 2 spies, why did they even spy out the land? But what about that next thing? Who knew we could talk so long on verse 1? What about that next thing? Why would the spies, God's chosen people, stop at the house of a prostitute? Why? Well, here's some possibilities. The house of a prostitute was probably a good place to hide and gather information and have no questions asked in return. Most people wouldn't think twice about strange men coming into town and stopping at a prostitute's house. They knew they could probably go in and out and be incognito, if you will. All right? It was the norm. The other reason is this. Her house was built into the outer city wall and allowed for easy access and easy escape. Now, what about the most obvious one? God was leading them. God knew what was getting ready to happen and knew who he had chosen and knew the next steps and led them right there. Sometimes God leads us to some of the most unobvious places, doesn't he? Some of the strangest places. And guess what? If this was today in the church, what would most people be doing? Hey, did you hear what the two saw? Why in the world would the pastor Joshua send them to the prostitute's house? I mean, what kind of church is that? God's not going to bless that. Maybe God sent them not to do anything with the prostitute, but to hide out and to convert the prostitute. He knows her heart. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what they needed to do. Do we ever consider that for a moment? Wow. Let's go to verse 2. The king of Jericho was told, well, somebody saw him. Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. You ever wonder about that? How they just knew they were Israelites? Did they have a uniform on? We're the Israelites. We're from Jericho. No, it probably didn't work like that. But they probably looked a little different. They probably knew. We can see how people come from different cultures, and we know they're from a different area. And he said they've come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. I guess someone saw them go in there. But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads out to the fords of the Jordan. They left the city and went after it, looking for them. And as soon as the pursuers had gone, the gate was shut. So, notice this, as I said already. Someone saw the spies and told the king. The king sent a message to Rahab to give up the men. Rahab agreed that they came, but then she kind of sent the king's men in a different direction. She lied to the king's men and decided to follow the one true king. Why was it okay that she lied? So not only do we have the spies at a prostitute's house, but we have the prostitute lying. And yet it's in Scripture. I don't know about y'all, but when I read things like this, it shows me the truth of Scripture. You know why? Because if I was writing, I'd probably take that out. Because I wouldn't want anyone to go, why is it a prostitute? Why are they lying? What's going on? Think about it. God wrote His Word with anything ugly in it, with people sinning, with mistakes happening, with all kinds of stuff happening, because it was real and it was authentic. Whether the questions remain, God's plan was real. And that gives me even firmer belief that the Scriptures are authentic. Although God forbids lying, Rahab didn't know all of God's commands yet. She wasn't a Hebrew. She wasn't a child of God yet. From that perspective, from a follower, okay? We were all God's people. He created us all. But she wasn't following Him yet. So those rules didn't quite apply to her yet from a biblical perspective. It was a defining moment. She was a foreigner, or these were foreigners who were coming in And she was a foreigner who didn't know God, but she was trying to leave her past behind and help God's people. This would be a defining moment in her life and the life of the spies. She hid them on the roof under stalks of flax. Flax, if you wonder what it is, it was harvested in the fields and it was piled high on the rooftops to dry. It was then made into yarn, which was then used to make linen cloth. Flax would grow 3 to 4 foot tall and would have been an excellent hiding place for them. So the king's men took the bait and they left. So we move to verse 8. Before the spies laid down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know, this is awesome, I know that the Lord has given you this land and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did at Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother and my brothers and sisters and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days. That number comes up again. 3 days. Until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land you tie the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you have brought your father, mother, brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. But as for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we're doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went to the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, that means going across the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, listen to this, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. A little different report this time. Rahab, she talked to the 2 spies before they went to sleep. She basically told them that all the people had heard what God had done for them. And when they crossed the Red Sea, and how he gave them victory over the Amalekites, and the people were trembling in fear. Think about this. I mean, does that stand out to you? The people of Jericho, who were not God's people, remembered what God did for them. And they were trembling in fear. What does that say? That the people who were not followers of God remembered and trusted in God more than the people that were God's chosen people who stayed in the desert for 38 years because they didn't trust and follow God. Sounds a little bit like the study we're doing in Jonah right now at Life Group. It's interesting that the enemies recognized God's power. They feared him even when the people forgot God's power and feared the enemy. Even when we forget to recognize God's power, others will. Think about that. I'm going to say this part again. The enemies recognized God's power and feared him, even when the people forgot God's power and feared the enemy. When they went last time, Rahab then asked the spies to swear an oath to the Lord not to harm her or her family and save them. Think about this. The spies agree as long as Rahab and her family doesn't tell anyone else about them. So she lets them down by a rope through the window of the city wall, since her house was built into the city wall. And in Joshua's day, it was common to build houses into the city wall. And even to have two walls, an outer wall and an inner wall, separated by 12 to 15 feet normally. Let me show you this picture. All right, so this is, I just kind of threw this down real quick, drew it real quick. This is ancient Jericho, and you see the two walls. You have the outer wall and the ramparts building up to it to get in, and the inner wall. So her house was built in the outer wall. So it was easy to get into, easy to get out. They could see what was coming. They could see the cord, all those kind of things. But this is kind of what we're going to look at. And in a couple of weeks when we talk about taking Jericho, this will be important to remember as well. So this is kind of what it looked like, the two different walls. All right? So she tells them to hide in the hills for 3 days so the king's men wouldn't find them. She devised a signal, the scarlet cord, to be tied on the window. Now think about this. These men didn't know Rahab. This was their first encounter with her that we know of. And yet, they had to trust her the first time when the king's men came in. What was going to happen? Rahab belonged to Jericho. All her honor would have been with Jericho. All her people, everyone that she knew was there. And yet, she forsook that to hide the men. She risked her own life. She really was worth nothing to most of the people in Jericho. She was known as a prostitute. They called her by her past. They called her by what she did. They didn't think about her future. And they probably didn't trust her much, although they listened to her when she said where the men went. She could have easily told them they're right up on the roof and hiding. Then again, even though the men got a little bit of trust with her that first time, when she told them to leave and then go hide in the wilderness for 3 days, she could have sent the king's men right to them, or she could have sent them right to the king's men. They had to trust her again that she was giving them good information where to go hide. Why would they even trust her? Most people wouldn't. Why would they trust her? Well, we see in Joshua 2:24, when the men got back, they said this: "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Isn't it awesome how God works? In the beginning, I asked you 2 things. Would you trust God to come through, even if He sent you on a dangerous mission? Maybe He's going to ask you to do something dangerous, like a spy in a dangerous land. Before we go into number 2, let me tell you this. Maybe you don't realize it. Maybe you don't see your work, your school, what you do around here is dangerous. But you should treat it the same way. You should, I think, in fact, we treat it differently. We fear more talking to people we know than 2 men going into Jericho in God's name to spy out the land that they might get killed in. And so instead of, we have nothing to fear right now when we talk to someone other than a rejection. And yet we are afraid to talk to people. We're afraid to tell them about who we worship. We're afraid to tell them about what He's done in our life and our testimony. We're afraid to invite them to church. We're afraid to sit down with them and spend time with them. Because what might they think of me? What might others think of me, this person? Why do we fear that more than going behind enemy lines? Or maybe we fear them just the same. It should be. Number 2 is this. Can you get past your past? You see, both things were going on in this message today. God sent 2 spies on a very dangerous mission. If anything went wrong, they would have got killed and died. And then he sent them to Rahab's house, a prostitute in a foreign land. And they had to trust her. And they had to trust what Joshua was doing to send them in there. And they had to trust God, ultimately. And Rahab had to make a defining decision. Do I want to stay in my past? Or am I ready to get past my past into the future God's called me to? What's the answer for you this morning? Do you want to stay in your past? Or are you ready to move forward into the mission God's called you to for this year and beyond? No matter what it is, no matter whether it looks dangerous, no matter whether others say there's giants in the land. Do you realize this? When others say there's giants in the land, God says, I've got this. They're melting in fear because of you, because you worship me, because I created it all. And if you follow him in his timing, then it's all taken care of. He is the God who goes before us, and he is the God who gives us victory. Do you believe it, church? Amen. Wow. Maybe that just excited me. Sometimes I just preach to myself. It's okay. So just like Rahab, we have to learn to get past our past. Our sin, listen to this. This is really important. Our sin doesn't make us bad. Our sin makes us dead. That's tough to hear, but it's the truth. However, there's good news. God's salvation doesn't just make bad people good, it brings dead people alive. Do you believe it? It's not about just, well, I'm trying to be a little bit better. It's no. Walk in his victory. Live a life with him. Today, we need to choose to trust in God no matter what. I'm sure Rahab was reminded many times of her past. Who do you think you are? You're a prostitute. Who do you think you are? You're nothing. They probably treated her horribly. I'm sure she thought she was unworthy. I'm sure she felt ugly by her previous life. I'm sure she had to learn and lean hard into God and to trust his restoration in her life. What about you? Are you still focused? Is the enemy still yelling in your ear? You're not worthy. You can't do this. You remember what you did last year? Remember what you did 10 years ago? You remember this? Remember what just happened? You can't do this. Well, I'll agree with the enemy from one perspective. You can't. You can't, but Christ can through you. You understand what I'm saying? You can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. And you can't do it. We're not built to do it on our own. But if we will trust in him and follow him, he will work through us. In his power, not ours. So church, trust in his restoration and understand this. I'm going to have this up on the screen. We need to get past our past and say, not today, Satan. When Satan reminds you of your past, you remind him of his future. Can you do that? When he whispers to you what you did last year, you tell him where he's going. And that the victory's been won. And you tell him who you follow. And get behind me, Satan. You have no place in this place. You have no place in my life. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in this world. You get away. And you claim that victory and you stand strong on what he's done in our lives. You may think that your life isn't important because of your past, but God has great plans in store for you. Listen to this. If. It's always conditional. Will you choose? He has great plans for you if you'll choose to follow him and trust him. But it's conditional. You have to choose. Towards the end of Joshua, At his time of dying, he said, you have to choose who you're going to serve. But as for me and my house, we serve the Lord. Who do you choose today? Well, Rahab, really something interesting. Maybe you remember we talked about her a little bit last year. If you follow through, you'll notice, as we're going to talk about here in the next couple of weeks, Rahab followed through with her promise. And not only that, later on, after the victory over Jericho, hey, I'm giving you a spoiler alert. Sorry if you haven't seen the movie yet or read the Bible yet. There's victory that's going to happen. God promised it, it's going to happen. So Rahab followed through, and she was saved, and her family was saved, and she ended up marrying an Israelite. Could you imagine what that was like? Hey, isn't that wasn't she used to be a prostitute? Hey, I'm going to tell you, God's got great plans in store, and he can erase what's happened. She married an Israelite, she followed God, and she became an ancestor to our Lord Jesus, and is listed even in Hebrews 11 in what we call the heroes of the faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31 of the New Testament says, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Not many people were listed in this chapter, and yet she was. You know what else is interesting? Let's turn to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, follow me here, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. This lowly prostitute in a city that was chosen to be destroyed saw what God had done and chose to make a defining moment in her life and to trust in God instead of fear the people. Trust in God and what he's done. Follow him and leave your past behind you. Leave your past in the past. And she became in the lineage of Jesus Christ. And then listed in the heroes of the faith. So whatever you think you've done in your past that's unforgivable, you can have a future. Who knows what God's got in store for you? He knows. Will you trust in him? Will you follow him no matter whether it looks like there's giants in the land or not? Sometimes we just see the giants when we need to trust in God. Sometimes we're so busy focusing on our past and wallowing in our past that we can't get to our future. Use the little mirror for the rear view to look back and see where we've been. But focus on the future and God's promises for your life. Next week, we're going to talk about the faith that it takes to finally cross over the Jordan and get to the promised land. I hope you're ready. Just stand and pray. Father God, we love you and we thank you for this day. And Father, I just thank you so much for this message, for starting with last week and as we finished out in December, and we talked about the Advent season and looking back to this first coming and looking to your second coming. We're excited about that. But Father, we know you have a word for us today about where you've called us to go and that we can move forward and that we can be strong and very courageous and not to fear, but to trust in you no matter where you call us to go, even when it looks scary, even when it looks like there's giants in the land. And Father, we don't have to focus on our past, and we can tell the enemy to get behind us because you are the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and you stood victorious. You've already defeated death. You've defeated the grave. You've defeated sin. And we love you and we thank you and we praise your holy name for this. So, Father, we just ask today, as we look into the life of Joshua and as you call them to the promised land, and we then look at how this applies to our own life, we ask you what you're calling us to do today. We know the most simplistic piece of that is just to follow you and trust you. What do we do, just like the song says? What do we trust you? And trust that you'll do what you say you're going to do. Trust that